Stay in the draft or come play for Duke? That's the big decision that Cedric Coward is trying to make. Let's talk about it on today's show.
You are Locked On Blue Devils, your daily podcast on the Duke Blue Devils. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody. Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Blue Devils podcast. My name is JJ Jackson. Thanks so much for being here with us today on Thursday, May 15th, 2025. Locked On Blue Devils is your one-stop shop where we discuss everything going on inside the life of Duke athletics, and we're talking a whole lot about Duke men's basketball this time of year. On today's show, we're going to dive into the Cedric Coward looming decision. Stay in the draft or come play for Duke for the Washington State transfer. And I'll have Kevin Connelly from Ball Durham back with me on the program today to break it all down, to talk about everything that you need to know with this important decision. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to follow and subscribe to Locked On Blue Devils for free, wherever it is that you get your podcast. Go ahead and leave us a 5-star rating and written review. I really appreciate when you take the time to leave us those written reviews. That's a big time help for us as we try and grow this program. Also, you can watch our show each and every day. You can go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel, like this video, share it with your friends. Really appreciate all the support, the interactions that we've gotten down in the comments. There are some everydayers out there that are commenting and adding to our Duke basketball discussion on YouTube. And I want to give a shout out to all of you everydayers there. So without further ado, Kevin Connelly is here with us on the program today. Great to see you once again, Kevin. And we've got some Cedric Coward news to sit here and discuss, as this is kind of the one big decision. We were talking throughout the course of the week, Kevin. How is it every single season? It feels like we get to this time of year and we've got a waiting period that we've got to go through to figure whether or not someone's going to come back and play.
Yeah, thanks for having me again, JJ. 2 days in a row, pumped up to be here.
Yes.
And a lot to get into here with this Cedric Coward stuff. And if you're hoping he was going to be a Duke Blue Devil this year, you're probably not feeling too good right about now.
Yeah, the hope meter is certainly shifting. Like, it was really high earlier in the process when he makes the decision to commit to Duke. As the combine has started to play out, that has certainly changed. We've got some video and audio that we want to play from Coward here in just a moment, Kevin. But let's kind of catch people up to speed. Again, Cedric Coward, if you're unaware, here we go. He's a transfer from Washington State who only played in 6 games this past year. Prior to that, he played at Eastern Washington. Prior to that, he was a Division III basketball player. He's a native of the state of California, and he's already made his visit to Duke. We've already got the photos of him wearing Duke gear. He knows that that's where he wants to play basketball, is Duke. When you look at Cedric Coward, the player, if people are unaware, kind of what jumps out to you about him?
Well, I think the first thing is his athleticism, right? He's a lanky guard, kind of what Duke built its team on this past season when they were one of the biggest teams in college basketball. And Cedric Coward kind of filled that role of being a versatile big player. Good three-point shooter. He could really shoot it from three-point range, and he can really put the ball on the deck and go score. So that's just another thing that Cedric Coward brings to the table, and NBA teams are seeing that as well, and that's why he is rising so quickly up NBA draft boards, especially this week at the NBA Draft Combine.
Yeah, so the numbers are on the screen now for what he did at Washington State this past year. 6 games, 33 minutes per game this season for the Cougars, 17.7 points per game, 7 rebounds, 56% shooting from the floor, 40% from three-point range. And we love, Kevin, we love good free throw shooters, 84% from the free throw line for Cedric Coward. All of those numbers, man. Just imagine what he would have been able to do if he played a full season for Washington State. Maybe it'd be a much easier decision for him to go ahead and go to the league as opposed to these options here.
Yeah, his plan was always to declare for the NBA draft and see how far he could get this year in the NBA draft. But in the meantime, and before all this combine and pre-draft workouts began, he decided, and I don't want to call it a backup plan, but that's kind of what it's described as, like, where would I go play college basketball if things don't work out this year in the NBA draft? And he picked Duke, and he picked Duke over Alabama. And I think as more and more people started to look into Cedric Coward and his story and what he was all about, people got really, really excited about him coming to play for Duke. And I think the big idea, and I had this myself, was, well, John Shire and his coaching staff wouldn't be going so hard for a player, even though they're going in the NBA draft, that didn't have every intention of coming back and playing college basketball next season. And I don't doubt that's what Cedric Coward, his plan was right away. But as more people started flocking to his workouts and seeing him shoot the basketball and seeing what he could do on the basketball court, as well as now at the NBA draft combine and his measurables and how he went through the drills, I think that perspective from him changed a little bit. And now he's more focused on the NBA draft, even more so than when he was a few weeks ago.
Here's what's good is that he's healthy, right? Because he only played 6 games for Washington State, then had a shoulder injury that sidelined him for the rest of the year. So the fact that you're able to see these type performances from him this week in Chicago goes to show, as he said over the last few weeks, he's good to go. He's ready to play. That's true. He's ready to go. He's recovered from that shoulder injury. So that's big-time stuff there. All right, let's take a listen. This was Cedric Coward at the NBA Draft Combine this week in Chicago. This was yesterday.
100% focused on the draft. Talking to Coach Shire and the staff, I think I communicate pretty much everything with them as I gain information. And they're 100% with me on my focus of the draft right now, because this is my dream. So at the moment, I'm 100% focused on the draft.
What do you need to hear to stay in the draft?
Honestly, I don't have like a specific thing I need to hear. Obviously, if it's like you're going to be a lottery pick, then yeah, I'm going to leave. But at the end of the day, I don't know if it's something specific I need to hear. I just know it's a conversation with my agent that will help me decide, and with the best information I have for the best decision for me.
How would Duke help you?
Oh, tremendously. There's a reason I picked them. It kind of sucks because people think like I'm using Duke for just the noise or whatever it is, or whatever it may be. But I picked them, and I love Coach Shire and the staff for a reason. And I believe they can help me if I were to go there. And, you see what they did this year. They got the whole starting lineup in the draft combine. So, I know they'll help me if I go there too.
How would you describe the strengths of your game right now?
All right, big-time stuff there from Cedric Coward, and that was, of course, from Isaac Trotter, friend of the program from CBS and 247 Sports. Enjoyed catching up with Isaac last week on the show. You hear Cedric Coward immediately blown away by his level of maturity and maturation, and I love the line of questioning there from Isaac at the end. How does Duke help you in a process like this? And tremendously is the adjective that Cedric Coward used there. Job well done, man. That was really cool to hear. What stood out to you?
Well, yeah, I think the way he presented himself, and let's be honest, a lot of Duke fans haven't necessarily heard Cedric Coward speak and how he conducts himself. I know there was the interview right after he committed to Duke on the field of 68, and a lot of people were impressed by that interview when he was talking about this past year's starting 5 and how he fits in and how many guys are coming back. Like, he knew what he was talking about when picturing himself with this Duke team. And kind of the biggest thing is like his idea of people thinking he's using Duke, and him clearly saying that's not the case. Like, there's clear transparency going back and forth between him and between Duke. And you could tell he feels like he's in a kind of a tough spot because he's already committed, but he still has this dream of playing in the NBA. And right now his dreams are happening right in front of him. They're coming true right in front of him. And right now, depending on where you look, he's a projected first-round pick.
Yeah, no, we love to see, obviously, him get this recognition, but want him to be able to play for Duke when it's all said and done. Hopefully he's able to get that recognition after playing for the Blue Devils. So we shall see how the cookie crumbles in regards to Cedric Coward and whether or not he plays for Duke this next season. We'll talk about what Duke's roster kind of looks like going into next year after we take our first break here on today's show. Locked On Blue Devils here today, brought to you by our friends at Wayfair. The days are getting longer, the weather's warming up, and people are spending more time outside, which means it's the perfect time to refresh your outdoor space. Whether you're working with a big backyard or just a small balcony, Wayfair has everything you need to make it feel more like you. Wayfair's massive selection of outdoor essentials makes it easy to transform any space into your ideal summer setup. From comfy conversation sets to sleek dining tables and outdoor decor, they've got it all and prices that fit your budget. I've loved looking at Wayfair over the last few weeks, loving the mix of styles that they offer, making it super easy to find pieces that match your vibe without spending a fortune. The delivery is free and hassle-free, even for the big stuff. I've got a pretty big yard here at my house, and I've enjoyed getting it set up for the summer for friends to come over thanks to Wayfair and the products that they're able to offer. Shop a huge selection of outdoor furniture online this summer. Get outside with Wayfair. Head to wayfair.com right now. That's wayfair.com, wayfair.com. Wayfair, every style, every home, a proud sponsor of Locked On Blue Devils. Let's keep this thing going as we move forward here on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils. JJ Jackson alongside my buddy Kevin Connelly from Ball Durham, talking about Duke going into the next season. Everybody loves our scholarship charts that we put together here, Kevin. So here's kind of an updated rundown of where Duke stands right now today. And this does assume that Cedric Coward is going to play for Duke basketball next year. If that changes, obviously there would be another roster spot open. The NCAA increasing scholarship limits up to 15 ahead of this season. And really, really cool stuff to kind of see it laid out like this. What do you see when you look at this roster?
You know, I think the biggest thing is that you see the returners. Again, still, I guess, questions on that house settlement if that scholarship roster does, in fact, go up to 15. But I wouldn't be that worried about that if you're Duke, because I think when you look at guys like Cameron Sheffield and Jack Scott and Ife Uwachukwu, yes, they can be on scholarship, but there's other ways to get around that as well if the house settlement doesn't pass and if the scholarships don't automatically go up to 15 like everybody had talked about. So I think right now you're just looking at a solid group of returners, and you're hoping the freshmen are able to elevate and make immediate impacts. Obviously, there is high hope for Cameron Boozer and projected to be a top 3 pick this time next year. Nicholas Kamenia, I think people are kind of envisioning a Con Knippel-like rise for him throughout the offseason and the summer. And then for Caden Boozer, you know, I think there could be a battle for the starting point guard when you look at him and Caleb Foster. I think Caleb Foster, obviously the incumbent, obviously in the pole position to be the opening night starting point guard. But as we've seen this past season, sometimes things don't always go according to plan. And Caden Boozer has to be ready to potentially fill in into that point guard role. And if he's called upon, be ready for the challenge.
Yeah, I think for me, the big thing looking at this is it's the first time that we've done another one of these since the transfer portal window closed, right? So circling back to the very first point you made, Kevin, nobody's leaving in terms of going to the transfer portal. These guys are locked in to play for Duke this upcoming season. They've already added a couple of those practice-type pieces. If Cedric Coward goes, obviously Duke's got to pivot in that regard there, and they can add a few more players to the squad this upcoming season. Somebody like Cameron Sheffield, Jack Scott, Ife, you know, like you said, depending on how the scholarship math adds up, there are ways that Duke can find to kind of work around that. Someone like Darren Harris, though, man, really excited to see what he can do this upcoming season. I think we're going to be talking a good bit about his production for Duke going into this next year.
Well, yeah, I think Darren Harris right now is an X factor for this team. And I know Cedric Coward is still on your scholarship.
How fun is that to say, man? That's awesome. Because, you know, like we don't often get in today's day and age, sorry to cut you off there, but with the transfer portal and one and done and everything that Duke's got, a guy who was a bench guy for the majority of his freshman year, and now there's an opportunity to be an X factor because you stuck it out. You decided to keep playing for Duke. I love that.
Well, we've seen the opposite in recent years, right? TJ Power, Jaden Schutt. We've seen guys come into Duke and then bounce relatively quickly after a year or two. But Darren Harris, a guy that is sticking it out, and Cedric Coward, like I was saying, is still on your list, but I don't think he's going to be there for much longer. So then all of a sudden, at least as of now, Darren Harris has a much bigger role on this team. But again, there have been some chatter and some noise and some rumblings going on about guys Duke is potentially looking into adding, assuming Cedric Coward is going to stay in the NBA draft.
Let's go there, Kevin. Let's go there. When we look at, okay, Coward's not there anymore. What's next for the Blue Devils? There have been a recent line of high school seniors that are graduating that have been on visits to Duke over the last few weeks. Maybe there's a transfer portal guy that pops up, because if Coward stays in, there's still the possibility that guys pull out. We just saw yesterday Boogie Fland make the decision to come out of the draft, and he's transferring from Arkansas to Florida. There could be a move like that in line that Duke makes. Who are the names that you think we should be watching out for?
Well, I think the biggest name is nobody of that sort right now. I think the biggest name is a name we've international prospect from Italy. All indications were Kansas. But now, after the rumblings of Cedric Coward not coming to college and staying in the NBA draft, all of a sudden Duke has hopped back in that pool. Now, Duke was recruiting him, but kind of focused their attention more towards Cedric Coward and took their foot off the gas of Dame Sarr. And that's kind of what I was talking about. It seemed like all indications were he was going to Kansas. Now it's kind of like pump the brakes a little bit. Duke could be very much right back in the running for Dame Sarr. I don't know if I want to call them the favorite as of right now, but certainly heavily in the mix. And it's no longer the lock to Kansas many people thought it was just 48 to 72 hours ago.
Okay, and then beyond that, when you look at Duke, they've had Braden Hawthorne and then Sebastian Wilkins visiting as of late, like we've talked about. Hawthorne, it seems like maybe it's not going to end up being a Duke commitment, as we're kind of reading between the tea leaves as of late. Originally committed to West Virginia. The coaching change, he decommits, comes on a visit to the Blue Devils. But then Sebastian Wilkins, Brewster Academy zone, is a guy that's possibly considering a reclassification and might be a fit for Duke.
No, 100%. And we haven't heard as much about these high school prospects. I mean, granted, they did just visit a couple of weeks ago, but we haven't. Typically, you hear a lot more buzz right after their visits, and we haven't heard much about that. And I'm kind of on the side of you might not hear a lot about that until you get more answers regarding guys who are in the NBA draft and who are going to withdraw. You mentioned Boogie Fland, the Arkansas player who entered the NBA draft, also entered the transfer portal. Now it seems like he could be potentially on his way to Florida. I think one of the biggest names that people are expecting to withdraw from the NBA draft is the reigning Big East Player of the Year, and R.J. Lewis, who is also in the transfer portal. And he won't be going back to St. John's if he does withdraw from the NBA draft. There are a couple of schools that are rumored to be in the running for R.J. Lewis. Duke is not one of them, but who knows, could that change if he officially withdraws and things start to pick up in his recruitment. And then the one player we haven't mentioned yet, Desmond Claude, the USC transfer.
Good point.
Remember, everyone thought he was going to Florida. He goes on his visit and things kind of fizzle out. Now, maybe Florida had the idea that Boogie Fland was going to withdraw from the draft and they were going to be the front runners for him, and they'd rather him than Desmond Claude. We haven't really heard anything much about Desmond Claude. I know Duke had reached out and made a phone call, and there was contact between the two sides, but things haven't necessarily really developed since then. So of all those players that we are talking about, the one that I'm focused the most on, and the connection seems right now the strongest between Duke and that player, is Dame Sarr.
So we'll see what happens in the days upcoming with Duke basketball trying to fill out their roster. It's been an NBA Combine week for Duke basketball with a lot of news and notes, the chaos of the NBA draft lottery a little bit earlier in the week, and so much more. We'll wrap up our show with the discussion around that here in just a moment. Thank you so much for making Locked On Blue Devils your first listen and your first watch here on today's show. For your second listen, make sure that you check out the Portal Show. Brian Smith has the latest rumors, portal entries, and signings. Be the most informed fan on the rapid changes to the college football landscape. Again, it's a wonderful show. Find the Portal on YouTube or wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. Also, do yourself a favor and go check out everything happening with Locked On College Basketball. Isaac Shade and Andy Patton do a remarkable job with that program, and they talk a whole lot about Duke this time of year, as you might expect. All right, Kevin Connelly's here with us on the program. We're talking all things Duke basketball as the Blue Devils are wrapping up the NBA Draft Combine this week, in a week that started on Monday night with the draft lottery. We haven't gotten a chance to react to this ourselves, Kevin, but how in the world Dallas, the Mavericks, get the number a 1.8% chance for them to win the lottery, and that appears to be now the new likely home of one Mr. Cooper Flagg?
Yeah, I find it really interesting. I know a lot of people do. I'm not subscribing to that it was rigged because they trade Luka Doncic and all that stuff. Honestly, I thought once it was down to the final four, if I had a pick, I was going to pick San Antonio just because it feels like when there's a generational prospect in the draft, it's San Antonio who gets it coming out of the lottery. But they got the number 2 overall pick. And had it been San Antonio, I don't think Cooper Flagg would have been a San Antonio Spur. I think that would have been packaged in a deal perhaps for Giannis Antetokounmpo as he could be exploring his options from the Milwaukee Bucks. But who knows? Maybe the number 2 overall pick works just as well for Milwaukee and a trade for Giannis. But yeah, it seems like Dallas, at least as of right now, is going to make the pick. And it will be Cooper Flagg. And I think it's an interesting spot for him because this is a Dallas team that has a lot of pressure and expectations on it to win and to make it back to an NBA Finals, given the trade for Luka Doncic. And that was the idea behind the trade. They thought they had a better chance at getting back to the finals without him than with him. Then obviously the devastating ACL injury to Kyrie Irving, not sure when he's going to be back on the floor next season. Would have to imagine it's going to be somewhere midway through. But Cooper Flagg, Anthony Davis, Derek Lively, I know Dallas is hoping that they stay healthy this year. And for Cooper Flagg, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing that, say, had he been on the Charlotte Hornets or the Washington Wizards, he could really do whatever he wanted and ease his way into becoming a star. With Dallas, he's going to play a role now on this team, and those mistakes that would have been fine in Washington or Utah or Charlotte might not be as fine in Dallas just because of the expectation to win there.
The Hornets fan in me, and like so many in the state of North Carolina, gutted and heartbroken that they do not ultimately win the lottery. But Cooper Flagg likely heading to Dallas. Talking about that, though, now that the lottery has come and gone, I should say. I put this out on X, on Twitter a little bit earlier this week. Find me there at _JJ_Jackson_. Went through, and now that the lottery is over, all of these big websites have started to put together new updated mock drafts for all 59 selections, typically 60 in the NBA draft, but a team has had to forfeit one of their picks. So 59 picks in this year's draft and where the 5 Blue Devils are at. The good news, Kevin, is that everybody seems to believe that all 5 Duke players are going to be drafted. We're not to a spot where all 5 are going to be in the first round, but looking at an overall view here, really cool that it likely seems that, as Cedric Coward said himself, the starting 5 is getting to go through this draft process and on their way to likely being selected.
Yeah, it's funny. Throughout this NBA Combine week, yes, we saw him at the lottery, but the man no one talking about, Kevin Connelly, because of an ankle injury. So he did not go through any of the standard testing and vertical jumps and shuttle runs and three-point shooting drills that we saw Cooper Flagg and Kaman Malawach really go through and get a lot of publicity. But for Kevin Connelly, he is going to have to complete that at an NBA facility before he has any individual workouts for teams. So that's just something to monitor. He does have to go through all that standard testing procedures before he can actually work out. And I think his agent said within the next week, he will be able to do that, recovering from a slight ankle sprain. The one thing in this Combine week that I found really interesting is Tyrese Proctor opting out of the 5-on-5 scrimmages. And you see there a wide variety on your screen of where he's projected to go, as high as 37, as low as 53, which is one of the last picks in the NBA draft.
Sure.
And him opting out makes me think that he got a promise somewhere that he's going to be selected, if not in the back end of the first round, in the upper echelon of the second round, because why else would he not participate in these 5-on-5 scrimmages where, at least to me, I don't really view him as a late first round, early second round pick. I'm more in the camp of I could see Tyrese Proctor going mid 40s to 50s. And if that's the case, I would think you would want to play in the 5-on-5 scrimmages to try to help your cause.
Agreed.
But he opts out, doesn't play in the 5-on-5 scrimmages, and Sion James does. And I think Sion James, out of the starting 5, is probably the most likely not to be drafted. And I don't say that with any disrespect. It's just the way the mock drafts have been working out. But I think he had a great quote the other day, and I forget who he did the interview with, but he said the biggest thing he learned at Duke is to still be an impact player on the floor while being surrounded by so much talent. And obviously that would be his type of role on an NBA roster next season if he is able to be drafted and latch on a two-way deal with an NBA team. So I'm interested to see how Sion James plays over these next couple of days in the 5-on-5 scrimmages and how he's able to carry some of that momentum into the rest of the NBA draft process.
The draft will be here before we know it. Again, May 28th is the deadline for Cedric Coward to make his decision whether or not he's going to come back and play college basketball. That's the deadline for everybody. And then towards the end of June, we'll actually see the draft play out. Now that we've had the lottery, the Mavericks have the top pick, and we'll see how many of these 5 starters for the Blue Devils hear their name selected. Kevin, always great to run down everything going on in the life of Duke athletics and particularly Duke basketball with you. Tell me about your work and how people can support you.
Yeah, over at Ball Durham, we're on top of everything with the NBA draft and the NBA Combine and where Duke is going to go with these last couple of roster spots. We assume they're going to have to fill based on Cedric Coward's decision. So come read us all the time over at balldurham.com.
Good to see you, Kevin. We'll do it again soon, okay?
Thanks, JJ.
All right, that's Kevin Connelly joining us here on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils. Always appreciate his time here with us on the program. Go support his work. Support what we got going on. Make sure that you subscribe to our podcast feed. Leave us a 5-star rating and written review. The algorithms love those written reviews when you take the time to do that. And also make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Like this video, share it with your friends. Let's continue to grow this audience. As always, go Duke. I'll talk to you again tomorrow. My name is JJ Jackson. Thank you and good day.